So hi everyone. My name is Matt Reel. I'm the Director of Solution Engineering at CTera. My contact information is on the screen. It's simply matt@cetera.com. So if you want to follow up after this, feel free to reach out. Be more than happy to discuss anything on CTera. But real quickly about CTera, what CTera does is we provide a software-defined global file system. And so what that means is we want to very securely and efficiently connect all of your enterprise sites that need unstructured data, file services to your cloud. And the goal is to not affect the end users, whether they're users or machines, but do not affect their performance, security, or the workflow. So what we provide a multi-cloud secure file platform for the enterprise. At the top there is analysts from GigaOM. They've rated us as #1 in this space, and they classify it as distributed cloud file storage. But we also have partner awards from partners from HPE and others. So all of this information is on our website, CTera.com, so you can find it there. But again, you can reach out to us as well, or reach out to me directly, and I'll provide it. But lastly, CTera has been around since 2008, so about 14 years of shipping product. Me personally, I've been here for 9 of them. And we have over 50,000 of our edge filers deployed across the globe. So we are the #1 solution in this space. And we'll get to why that is in the coming talk here. But just a quick a view of some of our customers. We really don't align to a particular vertical. Really, where we fit well is highly distributed enterprise or highly regulated, because you'll see in our product, security is fundamentally built into the solution. So the product can scale very wide in a very secure manner. And you can see at the bottom some of the partners that we work with. So we sell to the channel, so you can talk to your partner on possibly procuring the CTera solution to them. But what this solution provides, or what the challenges that we help solve, is providing NAS in a distributed environment. So those that are watching this, that are storage administrators, you understand the pain of trying to provide file access across a very distributed environment. Typical NAS or Windows file servers or any type of those SMB NFS protocol storage solutions are really designed for local users. So they can scale up and they can scale out very nice, but they can't scale wide. And when I say scale wide, it's a distance between these NAS frames. And so NAS is typically designed for a data center type environment where it's highly available, lots of storage for active and cold data. But once you get further away from that data center, those NAS protocols, they're affected by latency and bandwidth. So what happens is that for remote sites, you have to put another type of storage system out there, because you don't want hundreds of terabytes of inactive data at a remote location. So you put something else, and then you have to manage it separately. It becomes an island of data. It opens you up for ransomware attacks and things like that, because you now have to monitor it separately as well. And then over the past couple of years, the enterprise is becoming a lot more distributed. So there's a lot more remote workers permanently working from home, and simply giving somebody access to a file share over a VPN is not end user experience that you want to deliver. So what happens in those environments you have bad user behavior. So users start copying data from the file server to the desktop, so that way they can work on it quickly and offline. And so it just makes the enterprise more difficult to manage, as well as it just opens up for a lot of ransomware and other security attacks, because you're now storing data at the far edge. So what the CTera global file system does is we're going to take all of this unstructured data, all these shares that you have throughout the organization, and we're going to put it on cloud storage. And so when we say cloud storage, that's object, right? And so that's an S3 interface. So our friends on the phone here from AWS S3 is obviously the de facto standard, but we also support on-prem S3 as well. So if you have, whether it's Ceph, we have Susie on this webinar as well. So if you have Ceph, or even like an ECS or any kind of object store on-prem, we can also use that. So it doesn't have to be public cloud resources, it could be private cloud resources as well. But we're going to take all this data, we're going to secure it, optimize it, and we're going to put on S3 storage, which is now a different format and it's far away from your users. So you're not solving the challenge. So what the CTera Global File System does is we have cloud caching software that runs at the edge. And so we have different forms of it. We have the NAS filer, we call them the CTera Edge filers, that provides that SMB and NFS access layer locally to the edge. And we have fat or powerful filers, to provide data center type of environments. And we also have lower class hardware and software that we can provide these file services to smaller locations without providing a lot of infrastructure. So what we're doing is we're advertising and we're creating a copy of the active data for each site and storing it local to each filer. So that way those users have local LAN performance, but the infrastructure is minimal. You're just providing the storage at each location for that active data set, because all the cold data is presented, available and viewable at the edge, but it lives in the cloud. Only the active data lives at the edge. But everything is available. And so we can provide this file services across all these locations from a single namespace. And so this is a very unique capability from a global file system, is because traditionally what you have is you have file servers and each one has different data sets. And so what happens is you have to manually copy data across sites to keep it in sync and to keep it performant. But with the CTera global file system, you simply deploy a CTera Edge filer. It connects to the global file system and it presents whatever you share with that device. So it could be some of the file system or all of it. You have complete control. What it frees you up is it frees you up without having to manage the edge, because everything is managed at the core, and then the edge is presentation and acceleration. Right, so the data is mastered in the cloud, and the edge is just there for access and performance. So since the data is no longer mastered at the edge, it allows you to use this global file system for other use cases. So other use cases around disaster recovery, maybe file sharing, because the data is no longer mastered at the edge. So you can take the data and present it in multiple locations. And then at the far edge, we also have desktop agents. These are optional, they're not required, but for users that are not in an office with an edge filer, giving them VPN access for SMB, it doesn't solve the challenge. So we can provide local performance using a desktop agent, but everything's encrypted and optimized, and all the optimization occurs right at the desktop. And because we're a global file system, you can create content using one method and consume it in a different method. So it's the same data set, and we can present it, and users can access it using different methods. So it's a very powerful way of managing unstructured data, as well as giving access in a highly distributed environment. So when it comes to use cases, what can you do with this with this type of solution? So starting at the left with the edge filers, if you have Windows file server, Windows storage server, or VNXs or NetApps that are scattered throughout all these sites, you can eliminate them with CTera Edge filers. And the CTera Edge filers can be hardware or software. And so if you have virtual infrastructure in this location, you don't need more hardware. You can simply deploy a virtual edge filer from CTera, and now that virtual infrastructure is an enterprise class NAS that connects back to your core file system and presents petabytes of data with just a small amount of infrastructure for that active data set. So it's eliminating those type of storage platforms, as well as the management, because everything with the CTera platform is managed at the core, and the edge is just there for presentation and availability. This also enables multi-site collaboration, because we can take data sets and present them across multiple locations in an active manner and keep them in sync. So users in one site go to the local filer, they have access to the data. Any changes or creation done in one site are immediately showing up in the other site. Because our edge filers use continuous replication and continuous versioning. So what that also does, one, it eliminates backup from file servers at the edge, because the CTera platform is replicating the files offsite. So we're meeting that requirement. But that also gives you a disaster recovery capabilities, because you can take files or file systems present in one location and immediately present it somewhere else. So if the site's lost, there's a fire or flood, you simply redirect your users, whether it's a disaster recovery center, maybe in the cloud, but the data is now available somewhere else, and they're up and running. So from a RTO RPO perspective, we can provide sub-minute RPO and RTO, because our filers are doing continuous file replication and versioning. They're not scheduled tasks. So as soon as a file is modified or created, it immediately replicates and versions. So moving down to the remote workforce, which is kind of the point of the discussion here, is remote sites. You can provide a small amount of NAS infrastructure and provide that same performance they're used to. But for the remote workforce, we have those desktop agents that I mentioned. And so the goal is to push it directly to the desktop to optimize it, but it's the same namespace. It's the same data set that's accessible through an edge device, that's accessible through the desktop agent, and the presentation is identical. The folder structure is the same, the ACLs are the same. We can enforce the ACLs through the desktop app. So you can provide the best performance for your user without having to retrain them on how they access files. So we provide that capability, and we also have, we can also do this for VDI instances. So this is great for cloud VDI. So if you're using VDI in AWS or Azure, you can deploy our edge filers into those environments as well, and now you have local performance across clouds. So it's another use case that we can support as well. And then lastly, and I'll throw this out there because somebody asked about Box. So one of the use cases around our platform is external file sharing. So instead of having to copy data from a file server into Box to share externally, you can do that capability within the platform without having to duplicate data and without having to consume another service. So if the file system's in the cloud, you can share externally, and as administration, you can lock that down to certain users. You can lock it down to certain recipients, and you can also control how they share. You can control permissions and duration. So all of this is within a single platform, so you can do multiple use cases without having to consume multiple services. The edge data processing use case, this is really around remote sites that are generating data. You can put a small CTera edge filer. It can capture the data and immediately replicate it back to the core, so you can consume it somewhere else. Or if it's part of an HCI infrastructure, you can process the data locally. Our smallest NAS virtual interface is just a 2 CPU, 8 gig of memory. So you can even if you have a remote site that doesn't have a lot of infrastructure, you can put something very small there and capture all this data and replicate it back to the core without having to deploy lots of infrastructure. For security, the private cloud, as I mentioned, we support on-prem object store. And when we do that, all the compute also runs in the data center. So you can deploy our solution 100% private behind your firewall. And we can also do it behind your VPC as well. So if you're deploying in AWS, our software can run in your VPC and stay 100% behind your VPC. So this means no one from CTera has access to your data. The data is never replicated outside of your environment. The CTera Global File System is the only global file system on the U.S. Department of Defense approved product list. So we have deployments within the U.S. government across several agencies, and part of meeting that requirement is 100% private. And we also integrate into key management services as well for external key management, so we can meet those requirements. And then lastly is around the resilience of the data, right? Because we are the file system. The CTera is the file system, and we're providing data replication from the edge, versioning. So we're also protecting this data set as well. So we have embedded AV into the filer that's doing on-demand scanning, but we also have integrations at the core. And so, one of them, great example, is Darktrace. So we're providing all the file services, so we have all the knowledge of the activity. So as users are writing or reading data from the edge, we're taking all those logs and we can send them to Darktrace, and then they can use their AI algorithms to detect malware or ransomware or bad actors within the environment and step in and stop it. So even though we're providing the file services, we have an API layer where we can connect into other services like Darktrace to provide additional type of capabilities of this file system. For ransomware, because our platform is doing continuous versioning, we also give you a great ransomware remediation that's built in without any additional capabilities. So if you have data corruption event, say 1,000 files were corrupted, we're going to create 1,000 new versions of those files. So as soon as that corruption stops, you simply roll back the portion of the file system that was affected at the core, and that replicates to the edge. So you're no longer having to protect and manage and restore the edge. You restore the file system, and that replicates to all the other edge locations that are part of the file system.
And
then lastly, yeah, go ahead.
Just one quick question as you're finishing up. Dilip, and you've touched on this, wanted to know about performance and latency. He's got a big global operation. And then also you're touching upon this. How do you ensure compliance when people deploy CTera with regard to GDPR or data locality requirements that are getting more and more relevant?
Yeah, great questions. So for as far as performance at the edge, the edge filers they're designed for remote, and the protocol, and we, again, this is a 20-minute session, so we're not going very deep, but the protocol that replicates from the edge back to the core CTera actually has a patent on this, and so we're combining WAN acceleration and VPN security into a single protocol. So everything that replicates inline dedupe at a global scale, everything's compressed, everything's encrypted inline, and also at rest in the cloud. So we're also doing things at the edge as well. So we can also, like, if a user accesses a file that's not local, we can stream it to them, so that way they immediately access it, and in the background we'll hydrate the cache. So there's a lot of things we're doing. And the cache of a CTera Edge filer, we support anywhere from 1 to 256 terabytes of cache per filer. So if you have an office with a large amount of data, you can cache up to 256 terabytes locally. So we can keep a lot of data local for performance reasons. And then you asked a second question that I forgot already. What was it, Ron? Okay, we can talk.
The other question was more on just data locality, GDPR.
Oh, yes, thank you.
For compliance.
Yeah, so the CTera global file system is also multi-tenant. So if you have a tenant within the platform is a separate file system. So you can separate business units out as an example, but another example is geography. So I could have a tenant talking to a S3 target in the US, and I can have another tenant talking to an S3 target in Europe, and the devices connected to each tenant talk to the object store directly. So even if the global file system was physically in the US, I can create a tenant for Europe, and all that data stays physically in Europe, so you meet GDPR requirements that way. But you can also deploy, some customers take our solution and deploy it in multiple geographies for that reason as well. But there's lots of ways we can meet those requirements. And then, excuse me, last slide here before I finish, and I just wanted to point out, because there's a lot of NAS solutions out there that replicate to object, right? And so we, from CTera, we get a lot of questions from customers and partners like, what's the difference between us and those type of solutions? And that's what this slide is talking through. And so CTera is a cloud caching solution, which means 100% of the data lives in the cloud, and then we cache what's active local to the user. The NAS solutions that replicate to object, they're using object as a tier, right? Which means the data lives, the gold copy lives at the edge, and it's replicating to object for it and using it for a tier. So as data gets cold, it's going to replicate it to object to free it up at the edge. So when you start looking at use cases and how they fit, both type of solutions, can leverage cloud for bursting for capacity. That's kind of obvious. But when it comes to disaster recovery, for the NAS solutions that use object as a tier, the data still is mastered at the edge. So you can't use object for DR because not all of the data is in the object. With CTera, all of your data is already in the cloud. So if you have a DR event in one location, you just simply present the data to somewhere else and you're back up and running. And this can be done within seconds programmatically or minutes if you're doing the GUI. So it's a very simple way to recover from those type of events, especially, all the flooding and fires that are going on here in the US, at least. This is a very powerful way to have DR available for you. And then also bursting for compute as well, because since your data lives in the cloud as well, with the CTera type of solution, you can simply deploy CTera edge devices in any compute environment, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, and now you have access to the file system locally. If your file system lives at an edge location, you can't simply easily make it available in a different compute environment because you'd have to replicate all of that to it. The CTera software is designed to present and replicate data automatically. So you can use the cloud to also burst for compute because the data is also accessible. Same thing with data orchestration. We have APIs and SDKs. So, a lot of our customers manage our platform through a programmatic interface. And so you can also move data around. The CTera platform is cloud agnostic, so we can actually take our data from one S3 bucket and put it in a different one without impacting the edge. So we give you some flexibility around, where the data physically resides and what cloud provider, and you can move data around using our APIs and CLIs as well.
Hey, Matt, if
Yes.
you could, this is a good way to finish up. We've got to keep moving along. I'm going to ask you, there are a couple of questions people are asking. Just make sure you follow up with Rick about issues around migrating data and how you support data migration. We can finish up lots of great information, but I want to make sure we get to Nix and Susie. So if you could finish up, that would be great.
Absolutely. And just to touch on the migration, the CTera platform, specifically the edge filers, have migration software built into them that CTera developed. And so all you can simply do is you deploy an edge device, you point it at your source, shares, we'll index them, we'll tell you how much is in it, how much data is active, how much data hasn't been touched in X amount of time. So that way you as a consumer kind of know about how large that local cache should be. And then the migration tool will migrate it with ACLs. So you don't have to restructure your data, your file system, ACLs or anything. We'll ingest it as is. So that way we make the migration as simple as possible. But just to wrap up, the CTera global file system, the platform, multiple use cases around NAS, file services, edge filers, endpoint clients, protecting data at the edge, even machine generated type of workflows. And again, I want to highlight the external file sharing because it's, everyone we talk to they use some kind of external file sharing platform, whether it's Box or OneDrive or something like that. We can also provide that capability with our platform. So it just makes the platform more valuable when you can do more things with it. And it's extremely scalable. We have deployments into the tens of thousands of locations and the hundreds of thousands of users. And we also have deployments into single location, right? So we can scale down, we can scale up, we can scale wide. And we even have a hosted option as well. So if you're not looking to deploy infrastructure at the core, you can also consume our solution as a service. The cyber resiliency is built in through the file versioning and the replication. And then we also have the connectors, as I mentioned, into products like Darktrace, where we can leverage their intelligence capability to protect the files that are within our platform. So with that, Ron, I'll go ahead and stop.